What drives a soldier to walk straight into Taliban territory on purpose? Was it a mission gone wrong, a mental breakdown, or something darker? In the dead of night, deep in Afghanistan's hostile Paktika province, a U.S. soldier vanished from his outpost. Dressed in local clothing and carrying just a few $100s, he slipped into a world rigged with IEDs and crawling with Taliban fighters. What came next sparked chaos, massive search operations, 6 U.S. soldiers dead, and a military gripped by disbelief. When he finally resurfaced 5 years later, the real battle was just beginning. On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we tell the story of Bo Bergdahl and how America turned against him. In June 2009, Bo Bergdahl should have felt relieved. His platoon was exhausted, but they were scheduled for rotation the next morning, a move to a larger base for some long overdue R&R. But Bo wasn't interested in rest. Sometime in the night, he left the unit's outpost and walked into one of the most unforgiving and dangerous regions on Earth. He left behind his rifle and his night vision goggles, carefully placed on top of his bunk, leaving the base for what a more sensible soldier would call certain death. As the sun rose over the mountains, Lieutenant John Billings jolted awake. Bo's bed was empty. Was it a prank? The guys were always messing around, but Bo was really gone. It wasn't like there were many places to hide. Operating Post Mest was barely larger than a football field, and everyone knew that stepping outside the perimeter was a very serious health hazard. The area was crawling with Taliban. Billings knew reporting this would be a nightmare. Cases of AWOL and desertion went all the way to the top. But what if Bo had been kidnapped? It just didn't add up. How would anyone breach the base without being seen? But if he'd left of his own accord, then where? There was nothing out there. The men didn't get their rotation. Instead, in extreme temperatures, they searched the desert, burning in the daytime heat, freezing at nights as they camped in the cold, and squeezing up close to share body heat. It soon dawned on them that their friend and comrade must have deserted. Bad PR for the military, which hopelessly tried to keep the story under wraps. But on July 2nd, 2 officials spoke to the U.S. media on the condition of anonymity. They hadn't been authorized to say anything, but they did anyway. Bo, they said, had just walked off the base, and no one knew where he'd gone. The story immediately became a sensation, and the Department of Defense confirmed it a day later when Bo was declared missing or captured. 2 days later, Bo's frantic family was given an update when a member of the Idaho National Guard was knocking on their door. "Your son," the man said, "has been captured." That weekend, 4 military men trained in hostage events told them the grim news of what Bo was probably experiencing, what might have happened to him, what the U.S. military would do to ensure his safe return. At the worst, Bo would star in a homemade propaganda video surrounded by masked men with knives. The Taliban made matters worse on July 6th when it wrote on its website that Bo had been ambushed after becoming drunk off base. It wasn't true, but an accusation of drunkenness played into their anti-American propaganda. Bo hadn't touched a drop, but neither had he gotten lost. He'd gone because he wanted to go. He'd had enough. He'd become disillusioned with what his country was doing in Afghanistan, a sentiment shared by many troops, but most were not as critical as Bo. He'd written that he had seen too many locals abused by the soldiers, too many bullies, too many operational failures. Not long before he took off, he referred to his superiors as fools. In the same message and email to his mom and dad, he talked about the self-righteous arrogance of some of the men and what he said was his conceited country. He was, quote, ashamed to even be American. His father, a devout Calvinist who had homeschooled Bo and taught him the ethics of Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, wrote back to him, "In matters of life and death, especially at war, it is never safe to ignore one's conscience." He later told the media Bo was definitely instilled with truth. He was very philosophical about perceiving ethics. Bo genuinely cared about the Afghan people and about being on the side that was doing good in the world. He often ate with Afghan soldiers and learned about their culture. He tried to pick up their language, likely hoping that they wouldn't turn their guns on his platoon in what was becoming known as green-on-blue attacks. Still, in the years ahead, his sympathy for the Afghans would come into question. After he left the base, he just kept on walking. Where he was heading, he wasn't quite sure, as he marched up and down the rugged landscape that, from a plane, looks closer to Mars than Earth. A broad-shouldered, pale-skinned, clean-shaven American wasn't exactly going to blend in, especially not with the traditional linens draped awkwardly over his fatigues. His appearance baffled the locals. According to one village elder, when they saw Bo casually strolling through their settlement, most assumed that he was part of some kind of undercover military op. No one could believe an American soldier would just walk in alone. The locals approached him and, as best they could in their broken English, told him to stop right there. They pointed toward the nearby mountain, warning him that it was Taliban territory. He needed to turn back. and head back to his base. They tried to give him food and water, but he wasn't interested. The tribal chief later asked, why would an American want to find the Taliban? Of course, the AK-47 wielding Taliban fighters that found him after he'd been walking for about 10 hours were also a little bit shocked. They certainly weren't going to kill him. He was now a prize asset, a source of intelligence, a propaganda tool to bring shame to the enemy. What was Bo thinking, walking straight into the lion's den like that? In truth, Bo was probably a good man, but one with some issues, and not new ones. When he was a kid, friends sometimes saw him as a fantasist. His childhood hero was Bruce Lee, and he took Lee's philosophy seriously. He studied the martial arts, meditated to steady his mind, and grew absorbed by the ideal of the noble warrior, the code of the samurai, the chivalry of medieval knights. Later, as a prisoner of insurgents, this mindset might have been what helped him endure physical and psychological torture. But in reality, his fixation on bravery and composure partly came from a deep insecurity and emotional volatility. He suffered from anxiety, and when he was 20, it was a panic attack or a series of panic attacks that got him discharged from basic training in the United States Coast Guard. His idea of the noble warrior just wasn't him, but he was still determined to serve his country, and as luck would have it, his country was desperate. So 2 years after his discharge in 2008, he enlisted for the United States Army, and after training he was assigned to the 1st Battalion 501st Infantry Regiment, 4th Brigade Combat Team, 25th Infantry Division. Bo's disillusionment didn't begin in Afghanistan. It started stateside at the National Training Center in California. He watched as sergeants, the very people enforcing strict discipline, spent hours gaming on World of Warcraft. Hypocrites, he thought. These were the same guys banning privates from using their cell phones. He could never understand that during live-fire exercises, he was often told to just burn through your ammunition even when there were no targets to aim at. Pointless. It was as if they were deliberately trying to waste money. The army was getting desperate. With one war in Afghanistan and another in Iraq, with a war on terror in full swing, it needed boots on the ground. The Pentagon lobbied President Barack Obama for more men, and that is when the standards dropped. More and more recruits with health conditions and criminal records were enlisted. 1 out of every 5 applicants was given a waiver. One of them could have been a panic-stricken Bo, who we now know had once envisioned the war in Afghanistan as a noble humanitarian crusade. One of his friends later said that she was utterly shocked that he'd been accepted. He just wasn't stable enough. She later told the press, the only person worse would be someone with a low IQ. In my mind, they didn't care. Still, if the military had known about what he'd been writing in his journal, there is little chance that they would have shipped him off thousands of miles away to a very active U.S. military outpost. Not long before he boarded the plane, he had written, "The closer I get to ship day, the calmer the voices are. I'm reverting. I'm getting colder. My feelings are being flushed with the frozen logic and the training, and all the unfeeling cold judgment of the darkness." Fellow soldiers at least said Bo was always obedient and thoughtful, but he obviously had an edge. He told a guy in training that if he didn't like what he saw in Afghanistan, he would just walk off into the mountains of Pakistan. The guy might have thought that Bo was kidding around, but then he saw him studying maps on Thanksgiving when everyone else was chowing down on morale-boosting turkey. At least when Bo first arrived in Afghanistan, he felt like he was being useful. His time mainly taken up looking for IEDs. He took it seriously, maybe too seriously, with the guys giving him the sarcastic nickname Special Forces. It was as if Bo thought that he could become a mercenary, the Rambo of Afghanistan, saving the country all by himself. But he soon ran into what he saw as pettiness, unfair punishments, bullying, and an overload of operational chaos and confusion. He said that he was never sure what the security situation was, like the important matter of if there were Taliban around. He wrote, "Nobody told me what the proper guidelines were for dealing with every day being out there in the field. No one told me anything." There was obviously resentment burning inside of them. The other guys could see it. It got much worse, and he saw a child being mowed down in the street by a U.S. Army armored vehicle, and the fact that no one seemed to care. He really didn't like how the locals were being treated, later writing, "We don't even care when we hear each other talk about running their children down in the dirt streets with our armored trucks." Some soldiers, he said, just laughed in the face of horror. And then, the brutal reality of war really hit home. A first lieutenant, a guy Bo had been friends with since training, was blown up by a roadside bomb not far from the base. Bo blamed the higher-ups, having already experienced what he called operational screw-ups. That was when he wrote to his parents, "The horror of the self-righteous arrogance that they thrive in. It is all revolting." So he made a plan. Naively, he even asked the team leader if a pair of missing night vision goggles and a rifle would cause problems. When he was told that it would, he decided to leave them behind. He only took a knife, some water, something to write in, and a small camera. He was aware that if a soldier disappears, goes AWOL, then the news travels up, and not just in the army, but also in the Air Force. So if he vanished, he was hoping that he would get to air his many criticisms about the war to the general. Again, it was naive, another lapse into fantastical thinking, as was his belief that vanishing was a win-win situation. He thought that he could use his expedition time to gain intelligence about the Taliban's activities and where they were planting bombs. He would trail them through the desert, which in hindsight, armed only with a knife, was ambitious. But as we've seen, Bo embodied the archetype of the heroic missionary. And then he was gone, right after a Predator drone and a Pathfinder circled in the sky looking for him, but it was an electronic intercept plane that first sent the news back to base. The message said, there was an American soldier down there in the village looking for someone who speaks English. Later that afternoon, Colonel Michael Howard issued the order, all operations will cease until the missing soldier is found. At first, Bo was listed as Dust One, duty status whereabouts unknown, which was later changed to missing/captured. It wasn't until the next day that they knew what had happened. U.S. intelligence intercepted a phone message exchange between two Taliban. One wrote, "Is that true that they captured an American guy?" The other replied, "Yes, they did. He is alive. There is nowhere he can go, LOL." Messages that followed revealed that they were hoping U.S. troops would look for Bo where they had laid a lot of IEDs. Then another message said, "Can you guys make a video of him and announce it all over Afghanistan that we have one of the Americans?" This was a huge boon for the Taliban, who believed that Bo was some kind of big shot. They would soon demand that 15 of their jailed fighters be released from Guantanamo. The U.S., well, it didn't negotiate with terrorists. Not yet. And they almost rescued him. He was spotted in a nearby village, a place called Ghazni. He was dressed in khaki, with a bag over his head, being driven in a black Toyota Corolla, which was surrounded by armed men on motorcycles. But by the time the troops got there, he was gone, and he was going to stay gone. Unfortunately, the handwritten journal found at the base after he had left didn't fill the army with confidence that Bo would handle his captivity well. As they turned the pages, it was like watching his mind unravel. He had clearly lost touch with reality when, in some of his final entries, he had written, "I'm so tired of the blackness," and talked about a man hiding from the fields of blood and screams, hidden from the monster within himself. And now he was in a metal cage, the ultimate test of his physical and mental strength. Bo had always had a romantic idea about pain and endurance. He'd admired the British survivalist Bear Grylls, and for a long time he planned to join the notoriously tough French Foreign Legion. This young man from rural Idaho had even mulled going to Africa by himself to teach martial arts to villagers whose lives were plagued by violent militias. The reality of a cage in constant darkness and malnourishment, of punches to the face when you weren't expecting it. There was nothing remotely romantic about it. Private Bo was suffering. Meanwhile, the Taliban was making use of their new prize asset. They released a video of Bo eating and talking to the camera on July 18th. In it, he said that he was scared that he wouldn't ever get home. With the sound of cockerels crowing in the background, a shaken Bo talked about the girlfriend he wanted to marry and the family he so dearly missed. It was perfect for the Taliban, who had obviously told him what to say. Still, his tears looked real when he pleaded, "Please, please bring us home." The Taliban seized the moment to get as much information as they could out of him. The added danger-fueled resentment among American troops, many of whom would come to despise Bo for his reckless decision to walk off into enemy territory. Months dragged on as Bo grew thinner and more desperate. He attempted to escape. Once he survived 9 days in the wilderness before running out of water and being recaptured. A Taliban fighter later said that Bo fought like a boxer, and it took 5 men to bring him down. As punishment, he was chained like a dog and forced to stand in painful stress positions for days, tortured that would cause lifelong injuries, nerve damage in his legs, a degenerative back injury, and limited movement in his left shoulder. In all, he's believed to have attempted escape 12 times. He was forging his PTSD in the cage, confined for years, often in total darkness, where he said he had little to no understanding of time. Later, it would be said that his suffering was the worst endured by any U.S. soldier since Vietnam. The Taliban released more videos, now aware that Bo was making international headlines. They fed him a script, urging him to appeal to the American public to oppose the war. In one video, wearing army fatigues, he looks into the camera and says, "This is just going to be the next Vietnam unless the American people stand up and stop all this nonsense." Released on Christmas Day, the message hit hard, but it would later backfire on Bo. The U.S. military issued a statement claiming that he had been forced to speak under duress. In truth, they weren't certain. Not after reading his journal entries and the email that he'd sent to his parents. They had to keep this quiet. Desertion and Bo's angry condemnation and contempt for the military was incredibly bad PR for the war effort. Back home, Bo's ordeal turned into a political theater. In the Punch and Judy show of American politics, you either sympathized with Bo or you called him a traitor. The more nuanced middle path, a road seldom taken. Insincere politicians, right and left, seized the opportunity to madden the public and bask in righteousness. At the time, the military didn't even know which country Bo was in, but they later got intel that it was Pakistan. U.S. troops weren't supposed to operate in the country, though they sometimes did. Bo was in Pakistan, now held by the Haqqani network, an offshoot of the Taliban with close ties to Osama bin Laden. As months turned into years, the Taliban kept feeding false information to the public and U.S. intelligence, paying people to lie about Bo's location. Search teams sent to these areas risked walking into traps, places rigged with IEDs, or swarming with Taliban. It was later claimed that 6 U.S. soldiers had been killed while searching for Bo. But the boiling cauldron of the American zeitgeist exploded in 2010 when the news reported that Bo had converted to Islam and was now declaring himself a warrior for jihad. The reports state that he was on such good terms with his insurgent brothers that he walked around all day armed with a gun. Much of America erupted into a collective fury when Fox News wrote, Bergdahl was reported to be happily playing soccer with the Haqqani fighters, taking part in AK-47 target practice, and being permitted to carry a firearm of his own. The report said Bo laughed frequently with his captors, and when he passed them on one of his daily strolls, he would always say salam, the Arabic word for peace. And as if that wasn't enough to infuriate the public and his former comrades, the report said Bo had become an expert in the fine art of bomb making. Years passed and not much happened. Then in 2013, his parents received a letter from him, delivered by the Red Cross, after which they reported that their son was no doubt alive and his faculties fully functioning. But some people were still calling him a traitor. Then came May 2014, a decision that lit a political firestorm. The Obama administration agreed to release 5 Taliban commanders from Guantanamo Bay for a man many Americans believed had been friends with jihadists. For some, the negotiation had compromised one of the U.S.'s greatest protections when dealing with militants. President Obama was bombarded by a coordinated salvo of criticism from conservatives who said that he was getting soft and breaching U.S. policy. It was an awkward time for the Army, which didn't believe that Bo had turned traitor. No man left behind is what the public heard from the military officials who weren't still condemning Bo. He was peacefully handed over by 18 Taliban fighters on May 31st, close to the border of Pakistan, after spending some time recuperating in the hospitals in Germany and later in Texas. But there were still a lot of questions that needed to be answered. The internet became a firestorm of polarized opinions. U.S. troops made their thoughts known, many calling Bo a traitor whose hands were stained with blood. A commander at Fort Bragg didn't hold back, calling him a dirtbag and a Taliban sympathizer. A guy from Bo's unit was furious, writing on Facebook that Bo should be executed. It split America down the middle. Others said, sure, he had done wrong by leaving his post, but he had paid for it. That didn't mean that they forgave the commander-in-chief for agreeing to the worst deal ever. Still, Army investigators reported that it had not found any evidence that Bo had taken to making IEDs or had spent any of his days of captivity high-fiving militants after scoring a goal. All that talk about him getting friendly with the enemy was finely tuned Taliban propaganda, messages they promulgated by feeding misinformation to U.S. intelligence through paid assets. But that didn't mean that Bo hadn't done wrong. After all, he had left his post. And what about those 6 guys the press was saying had been killed searching for him? Much of the media reported this too. Time magazine wrote, soldiers who served with Bergdahl are grumbling that he deserted and shouldn't be hailed as a hero, especially given the resulting cost in American lives. An investigation found that it wasn't so clear. Men had died at the time of the search, but not while directly looking for Bo. Still, on a door-knocking mission to find him, Master Sergeant Mark Allen was shot in the head. Allen survived but died in 2019 after suffering lifelong health problems. A report stated that units had been made more vulnerable because of that search. So, some still blame Bo for that devastating injury and also some of the deaths. The matter remains divisive. In court, Bo's defense team said he suffered from schizotypal personality disorder, a mixed bag of conditions such as anxiety, delusions, thought disorder, paranoia, and general oddness. Sure, he was odd, and sure, he had condemned the U.S. Army, But did he deserve to go to prison? In 2016, presidential candidate Donald Trump didn't mince his words. In his campaign, he called Bo a dirty, rotten traitor who had gone to the other side. This opinion gained momentum from Trump's supporters, and of course, the political football was kicked back from the other side. In 2017, Bo pleaded guilty to desertion, although his supporters said what he had done was closer to AWOL. He was dishonorably discharged, reduced in rank, and fined $1,000 from his pay each month for the next 10 months. But with no prison time, the result infuriated much of the U.S. public, with Trump calling the decision a complete and total disgrace to our country and to our military. Many veterans who had fought in Afghanistan agreed, but not all. On the other side of the coin, Bo had endured 5 years of hell, paying a brutal price for a terrible decision made under extreme mental strain. Not only that, he had been hired when the U.S. Army wasn't exactly enlisting the best. Even now, as Bo tries to piece his life back together and his lawyers demand a Medal of Honor, his legal fate remains in the balance. His 2017 conviction and dishonorable discharge were vacated in July 2023 due to a judicial conflict of interest. But the Justice Department appealed in May 2024, and the case now awaits decision from the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeal. But one thing is clear. His ordeal is far from over. Bo Bergdahl's story is just one chapter in Afghanistan's long, war-torn history. Watch what actually went wrong in Afghanistan to understand the full picture, or click on this video instead.